we've got a new book coming to D&D Beyond. What is that book? You're the author of this.
It's the Griffon Saddlebag Book 2. I make magic items for 5th edition. I've been doing it for now, this is my 6th year. And every weekday I make a new magical item. And every few years I compile it together into a book.
You've got 12 new subclasses. What are
Yep.
these subclasses?
So there's the Bard, College of Mercantile, which is every bit of a silver-tongued haggling bard that you'd possibly want. They use coins and money as their language. They get the ability to essentially kind of like flip a coin instead of using their bardic inspiration. And if it's heads or whatever they call somebody gets like to maximize essentially a bardic inspiration. So instead of like rolling a d6, it is a 6. But if it's tails, conversely, or at least not what you guess, the GM gets it instead, and they can use it however they want. There's also the Barbarian Path of the Infernal, which is a bit of like a Hellboy inspired thing. You have like a big, massive like claw arm that you can use to either like ignite the weapons that you have or use as like its own hellish or demonic unarmed strike. There's the Festus Domain Cleric, which is a cleric dedicated to parties and festivals and feasts, and so it is every bit the gastronomy domain,
Yeah.
and that it has to do with like turning your stomach or create. It can actually create daily like potions of healing using its channel divinity. This is absolutely the kind of cleric that would be good for like carrying like like a wok or like some kind of saucepan as like a shield and like a mace with like a big saucepan helmet, that sort of thing. It's absolutely that kind of cleric. So the druid gets the Circle of Dragons, which I know that there have been various like plenty of homebrewers will go this direction at least once. I think that this one turned out rather well. Otherwise, I wouldn't put it into a book. But the intention is that you get to turn into a dragon. You get to kind of choose how that looks, and it is properly balanced so that it functions a lot like a wild shape, and you can your abilities kind of scale and grow with it. And it instead of you like resort shunting back into your humanoid self, when it reaches 0 hit points, it functions a little bit differently in that it's the hit points kind of like overlap with yours. It's like a bunch of temporary hit points in function.
Yeah.
So it more or less doubles your health and allows you to kind of like rampage around as this dragon that can use these various effects and even cast druidic magic all the while. And it scales and it progresses very like satisfyingly over time. Um, yeah, that one turned out really well, and I've heard a lot of really good feedback from it. The fighter gets the Steel Hawk subclass, which is a lance, typically a lance wielding knight, that uses it in much the same way of like Final Fantasy fans of old. Dragoons can like launch themselves through the air to reach faraway places or to jump and slam down on that sort of thing. It is a mobile armored fighter subclass that is really fun because you get to look at your various maps and say, okay, I'm going to go from here to here along this line. What is in the way? Can I vault over that, or what can I hit along the way? And
Hmm.
it's really fun to instead of like having to like kind of like tromp around in these like heavy armored boots or plate or something. You can just like supernaturally jump like from place to place, and it's really fun. The monks get the Way of the Aether, which is in counterpart to the original like monk's Way of the Four Elements. This is like the classic fifth element is Aether. So this is a bit of like a ghost busting monk, so to speak, that also can use their own key or focus points to become more ethereal in the process and help Like they can go through walls using the step of the wind, and other monk abilities to kind of extend their reach, like using these kind of like ghostly hands, so they can attack essentially with wisdom from afar, creating these like ethereal, ghostly sort of punches, without ever like moving their arms. Um, and they can even put souls to rest. They have their own sort of like turn undead sort of mechanic.
Hmm.
The paladin gets the oath of the spell drinker. Also, all of these are going to be also tied to various settings in the book. So there are 14 settings, one tied to each subclass and one tied to each of the two playable races. So this one is tied to a setting option that goes into detail about this kind of long-standing war between like pro magic users and anti magic users, and like like for all the common folk who don't have access to magic, they are at the mercy of these like necromancers and land liches, and like for as much wonder as magic can do, equal and superior harm can come from it as well. And so those that are fanatically driven to this, try to stomp it out in this setting, and like kind of giving you options for how to run that sort of campaign. And so a paladin that has sworn the oath of the spell drinker, uses their various channel divinity abilities and other mechanics to stomp and put out or stop harmful magic or turn it against them, in like almost kind of like clever wizard ways, but in the well armored, capable hands of a paladin.
Right.
The Rangers get the Rockborn, which is also based on an item series from back actually in book one. And it is a ranger that can conjure wind and work along with it in order to help like guide their arrows, or um, uh, uh, yeah, bolster their abilities using wind and this kind of idea of like flight as this guiding nomadic force.
Very cool.
The rogue gets the Grim Surgeon, which is every bit as like fun and like sensibly edgy as you want it to be. It is a rogue that has like a semblance of like blood magic ability, and they use that to either like poison and curse and corrupt a target, or uh put an ally back together and perform like field medicine, and triage, using the same weapon that any surgeon has, which is a knife. So yeah, that was a really fun sort of like classic, like a plague mask sort of style character in mind, but instead of going for like a typical like healer, um, you know, direction, I had a really fun time like kind of focusing more on like a doctor with knives is really just like a really well-educated rogue.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, so I went that direction and had an absolute ball with it. The sorcerer has the Desert Soul, which is also kind of tied to a long-running setting, that inspired this, but it's the soul of this sorcerer is matched with the heat and the sand and the dryness of a desert, kind of like swirling within them, and that manifests in very super magical, supernatural magical ways, allowing them to like even turn to sand and use that to kind of navigate around, or create blistering heat from it. The warlock gets the many, which is one of my personal favorites as well, which is for all these patrons that have like various heads. So hydras or medusas, as an example of like these kind of like powerful multi-headed beasts that have the power to bestow upon loyal subjects. So this is a warlock that has a number of like invisible ghostly heads that only they can see, unless if you have like true sight or something.
Hmm.
Um, but you are able to manifest and use these heads that kind of like come out of your shoulders, and this you can flavor this to kind of like speak to you or give you like whisper you like eldritch secrets. But you can also use them as ways to like keep a lookout, right? So you can't be surprised if you have any of the heads, because they're always kind of like looking around and oscillating around you and keeping an eye. or you can manifest them as like for additional offensive power as well. This is, I think, such a fun and flavorful subclass. And I know numerous people, at least in my community, have told me about it like separately in emails or in Discord messages saying how much they are having a fun time with it. And lastly, the wizard has the School of Wand lore. These are wizards that create the wands that you find in the world. Like somebody has to do it. And so these are wizards that can, instead of like necessarily putting their spells down onto scrolls and selling those, these are wizards that create wands that they can hand out to people or get benefits from casting from wands, and can kind of manifest these motes of energy around them to fling off almost like magic missiles of sorts when casting spells, and using them to kind of like empower their wands and how they use them.
That's a lot of content.
It's a lot of content. It's a lot of content. A lot of
And then you
you know,
have
and a
like
lot of thought
100
goes.
monsters on top of that.
Yes, and 100 monsters. So yeah, these monsters are tied to the various settings, but you can use them wherever. It is so much fun getting to make these settings because it gives way to monsters, it gives way to subclasses, it gives way to lore, and it allows me to like say, hey, if you enjoy this item but don't know where to put it, here's an example of like put this item in here as treasure. Like maybe from this person, or or with this kind of storytelling, like a mechanic, right? Like I really enjoy being able to make these settings and kind of tie it all together like that. So yeah, so these 100 monsters are tied to these 14 settings. Um, and yeah, they're so much fun to make and concept, and kind of give additional make believe flesh to these settings, and to this world that you can kind of like pick and pull and reconstruct how you want. Because again, I'm not really the kind of person that would say like this is the right way to use these settings, or this is the right way to assemble these in this particular world map. So yeah, pick and pull whatever you like, assemble it however it makes sense in your world using the tools that I've given for you, and you are more than capable to kind of like tie it all together in whichever ways will inspire your players. And I'm so delighted to be able to do that.
We've got two new playable races. What are
Yes.
those?
The gelatin or gelatin, however you kind of want to emphasize that O, and the Etherion. The gelatin is a portmanteau of gelatin and a skeleton. And is by far one of my favorite things that I've ever done. It's what happens when an ooze, when a gelatinous cube or the like, um, has absorbed a skeleton, but that skeleton is then reanimated by necromancy, and it kind of creates this symbiotic relationship of like is the ooze's semblance of intelligence controlling the thing, or is the undead, like reanimated skeletons intelligence kind of like running the show? And a gelatin is more than the sum of its parts, in that it's more than just a skeleton wrapped in ooze. It is the culmination of that, and whatever it grows into, or like decides that it can be in this newfound life.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm a fan of skeletons and Linus cubes, so that's a good meeting point for
Yeah.
someone who wants to play that. And then
Yeah.
the Etherian?
The Etherian is a native to the border ethereal. They are long lost descendants of typical elves, and other fae. They are gray, like kind of gray toned, like everything else in the border ethereal. But as a result, whenever they are able to migrate and find their way into the material plane, they are like overwhelmed and all about like hypercolor. So they will don themselves in as many colors and just flamboyance and audaciousness, wherever possible, at least as a culture. And they have this kind of native ability to peer in like short bursts into the ethereal, while they're on the material. But culturally, because they grew up on the border ethereal, like nothing grows there except for like this one plant that I invented for this. There's an entire setting where the like, it goes into optional rules for the border ethereal. and like how to run these various civilizations. So these Etherians are um, they are survivalists because they have to be, because there is pretty much all the only thing that they have access to are things that somehow magically make their way through a portal, or like if an adventurer goes into the border ethereal and then dies and they leave that stuff behind. It is a atypical place to live, which makes it atypically difficult to survive in. So I had a really good time creating these sort of civilization or like cultural aspects to like what would it entail to live here, as well as like what do these Etherians know that the typical material plane native doesn't? These Etherians might know who you are because they've been following your adventures from the ethereal plane. You just haven't been
Right.
to see them. They could be like, "Hey, did you hear about, like what this magical group of adventurers is doing? Like they slayed that dragon or whatever." And like nobody was there to see it. But we know, so they kind of have their own like almost kind of like gossip corner mythos that they just like are like it's like everything. The world is their soap opera, and they're the only ones who can like get to see all the juicy bits. Yeah, so I had a really good time kind of like creating an idea for what it would be like to have somebody that somehow found a way to live there, and then conversely, what it would be like for them to come out of it into the material if they found a portal or something, and how that would affect them.
Perfect. And then you had some other magical items you wanted to talk about. What are some of your favorite ones?
So the one item that I include in well, what will be all of my books, in book one and in book two, is the Griffon saddlebag itself, which is an artifact that scales with the player to a degree. It is an artifact that functions like a bag of holding, but at the GM's discretion, and like over time, it can pick up like sentience and utility and flavorful mechanics over time. So it really becomes kind of like a traveling party member. That the GM has the ability to say it says nothing to you, or it gives you a quest and stuff like that. I'm even years later, I'm still rather fond of the mechanics in it. But in terms of like things that are only in this book, the cleaning cube I think is particularly delightful. That is it's a little it's like a cut off bit of a gelatinous cube that has just enough sentience to the point where it wants to go around and make sure that everything around it is squeaky clean. So you just kind of have it like and essentially mops your house for you, and picks up things like picks up like gold pieces that kind of stuck between the sofa cushions and stuff like that. I have a line of fun potions. One of them is called the gin and tonic, or DJINN. I know a lot of folks enjoy those. The Fool's Lamp is actually showcased on the cover, and this is like a genie's lamp. It very purposefully creates stories in that it puts players in like an unexpected position because they expect one thing and then it's actually another. In much the same way that like a bag of devouring from the DMG is
Yeah.
to a bag of holding, similar sort of thing. I like the gnashing key, which also has a bit of filler art made for it as well. And so like instead of like you put this key in, and instead of like trying to pick a lock, or instead of it like properly opening a door, the head of it just kind of like it just kind of gnashes. It's like would be teeth, and just like destroys the lock from the inside. I think that's like very cheeky and fun. Horatio's Impossible Ship in a Bottle is like a ship in a bottle. But when you, I think it's when you can use the item to create, like to manifest like the ship in there becomes large.
Yeah.
And I think that is like very easy for a GM to be like, oh, this would be an incredible way for the party to escape from this situation, or to turn this from like a landlocked campaign into a seafaring one very easily without them having to worry about like, where do I buy a ship, or like like what ports are nearby. They find a body of water that they need to get out in, and they just chuck the bottle in there and see what happens. And I think there are moments like that like these items are really good for. So I have a series in there called the Pollinator series, and it gives way to essentially like you become a bee, like not necessarily like a little bitty guy, but you get to invoke all the powers that you'd expect with a bee, and that's really fun. And getting to like paint all like the fuzzy nature bits of it, and the helmet's like cool and like very like Ant-Man like. It's a really fun time. There are a ton of rings. Some of them in particular really speak to creating meaningful connections with people, so you can share some of them. There's like the rings of the true companions, and that allows you to gain various benefits with somebody else who's wearing like the partnered ring.
Hmm.
So officially so like, there aren't a lot of official like scepters and rods. So I go out of my way to try to make more. And one of my favorite ones that I've ever done is the rod of the magic cycle, which is every bit the sort of like Tron light cycle that you'd want it to be, but like for a druid.
Yeah.
So yeah, so you have this thing, and it becomes like this um like elk-like magical wooden motorcycle of sorts. It's balanced around like what a riding horse gets more or less.
Yeah.
With like the appropriate balancing and like fun and flavor, so it's a little bit different. And yeah, it was that was so delightful to make. And yeah, I love hearing when people get to use it because it's so typically out of place, but flavored and designed in such a way that that it can even feel at home in a fantasy setting.
What's it gonna feel like having all this content on D&D Beyond?
Oh, it is a privilege being able to make it accessible to folks. I know a lot of people will make homebrew versions of it, which I absolutely suggest and recommend and agree with. Please do it. Set it to private if you do. But this is such a wonderful way to mechanicalize it and make it effortless for you to include with art, with all the bells and whistles attached officially at your disposal, at a fingertip, and it's such a privilege to be able to make it all there and accessible to a whole new demographic and whole new player base that otherwise had to go through a lot of hoops in order to use it. From the beginning, the Saddlebag is really about making sure that you don't get priced out of a hobby. And it is such a delight to be able to put this here in a format that's going to reach so many people. And it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.